My point is that before and after consecrating a policy that tied us hip and thigh to Saddam Hussein, George Bush had all the information that he needed to know that he was in deep, deep water. But he persisted. Although in November, the CIA again reported that Baghdad was shopping everywhere for chemical, biological, nuclear technologies and for ballistic missile technology. Did that set off an alarm bell in the Bush White House? And even though the CIA again reported a link between B&L funding and the Iraq nuclear and missile programs, in November, the administration agreed to go ahead with another $1 billion in U.S. taxpayer-subsidized loan guarantees to Iraq, loans that the U.S. taxpayers now, courtesy of George Bush, have to pay off. In January of 1990, President Bush issued a determination that exempted Iraq from Section 512 of the Foreign Operations Appropriations Act of November '89, prohibiting further loans to Iraq. The Congress had seen this evidence, and as representatives of the American people, they were attempting to protect the taxpayers against the loss of funds and to protect us and the rest of the world against the use of taxpayer dollars to finance terrorism and to acquire weapons of mass destruction. But on grounds of national security, the President declared that the Act's prohibitions would not apply. And yet this was the same season when the Rand Corporation reported that an estimated 1,400 terrorists were operating openly out of Iraq. In February 1990, Saddam Hussein called for the removal of U.S. forces from the Persian Gulf. And yet the same month, the administration actually apologized to Saddam for the offending content of a Voice of America broadcast, which had had the temerity to criticize Iraq's human rights record. Coddling tyrants is a hallmark of the Bush foreign policy. March 1990 brought no improvement when U.S. and British agents arrested several Iraqis in the act of trying to smuggle nuclear triggering devices into Iraq. In April, Saddam Hussein issued his infamous threat to burn up half of Israel with chemical weapons, and he noted advanced binary chemical weapons. Still, Bush toadied up to Saddam. Nothing seemed to set off the alarm in the Bush White House. It seemed that Saddam could do anything, say anything, threaten anything, and still the U.S. taxpayer loans continued to finance his acquisition of the very weapons that he was threatening openly to use. Also in April, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York noted that B&L money was diverted to purchase nuclear triggers in the United States, which had later been seized by British Customs. That same month, British Customs also seized pipe sections headed for Iraq, which were quickly determined to have been parts of a super gun. Similar shipments were seized in Greece, Turkey, Italy, West Germany, and Switzerland. And yet, on April 12th, at the personal request of George Bush, Senators Bob Dole and Alan Simpson, the number 1 and number 2 Republican leaders in the Senate, respectively, traveled to Baghdad and told Saddam Hussein that President Bush was still ready to veto any sanctions against Iraq that Congress might pass. They added, as a footnote, again at Bush's personal request, they said, the comforting news that the author of that offending Voice of America criticism had been fired that same day in an effort to please Saddam. In April and May, Commerce Undersecretary Dennis Kloski attended 2 meetings at the White House where he recommended that the U.S. tighten restrictions on exports of high technology. But again, he was overruled, and the flow of technology from the U.S. continued. As a side note, when Kloski testified about this before the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on International Economic Policy and Trade about a year later, he was fired within 48 hours. Well, May arrives, and a terrorist attack on the public beaches of Tel Aviv was launched and thwarted. It was planned by a Palestinian group operating openly in Baghdad with the full knowledge and support of Saddam Hussein. On May 21st, the USDA sent up another warning about diversions of funds from U.S. guaranteed loans. But on June 15, 1990, Assistant Secretary of State Kelly told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that the administration still opposed any congressional sanctions against Iraq. And in July, as Iraqi tanks and soldiers massed on the Kuwaiti border, the Senate tried to pass another sanctions bill against Iraq, and the administration fiercely opposed it all out. Not only that, but on the eve of the invasion, the Bush-Quayle administration kept selling Saddam Hussein dual-use technology, such as sophisticated computers, flight simulators, and equipment to manufacture gun barrels. At that very moment, however, high-level officials in the administration, including Secretary Baker, were finally forced to confront what they should have known from the outset of Bush's administration, that Iraq had grossly abused the benefits extended to it by Bush. In July, a memo jointly drafted by 4 senior officers of the State Department was sent to Secretary Baker and approved by him. According to this memorandum, the existence of which just came to light a few days ago, the administration acknowledged, and I quote, "Iraq is actively engaged in developing chemical and biological weapons and ballistic missile systems and may be seeking to develop nuclear weapons as well. Iraq has been attempting to obtain items to support these proliferation activities from U.S. exporters, in some cases successfully," end quote.